Well, let's go ahead and kick it off. I think we've got enough people here in the room. Welcome, everyone, to episode 9 of NFTV. Today we have the legendary author, King Ben Mezrich, joining us today. Ben Mezrich has been an author for 19 years, has authored 24 books, is a major international New York Times bestseller, has sold over 10 million copies, including Bringing Down the House, which is the story of 6 MIT students who took Vegas for millions. It spent 63 weeks on the New York Times bestsellers list and was adapted into the hit film, 2008 film, 21, that starred Kevin Spacey and Kate Boswell. He also authored The Accidental Billionaires, The Founding of Facebook, A Tale of Sex, Money, Genius, and Betrayal, which spent 18 weeks on the bestsellers list, and then was adapted into the 2000 hit movie, The Social Network, which was nominated for 8 Oscars and won 3, included Best Adapted Screenplay, and he also won at the Golden Globes for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Score. Also authored The Anti-Social Network, which is the story of the GameStop short squeeze from last year and everything that happened on Reddit. He's the only nonfiction author to have 2 adaptations open #1 at the box office. What a line. And currently he's a writer and consulting producer for the TV show Billions. King Mezrich, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us, and we're very happy to have you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much, and happy to talk about anything in that list of stuff. I've been around a while, I guess. The list keeps getting longer, but it's great. Great to have people here, so thank you.
You're very welcome. You know, that's an incredibly impressive list, and as impressive as that list is, I couldn't believe as I'm going through reading that and I'm doing research on you, that's really not what we're talking to you about today. We're actually talking about your Mezrich, your BeNFT project, the Mezrich NFT, that is really trailblazing and maybe the first of its kind to have such weight behind it, of somebody with such incredible experience in the production world of taking things from concept to the screen. And the fact that you are rolling that out for a community, I'll read this real quick. Something from the website that really stood out to me that's pretty powerful. It's a quote from Ben. "For years, I've had the privilege of doing what I love, writing books and movies and screenplays for a community of readers and fans that enjoy going on these journeys with me, diving into the same timely topics and stories that intrigue so many of us. But what's bothered me for years is that I haven't had a great way to show my appreciation and engage directly with my community of readers. The Ben Mezrich NFT project is my way of trying to address that." I think that is a perfect opening for this. And as I dug into your project of Ben Mezrich NFT, I saw that you had really thought out your details of the launch and all the details of Mint. We can dive into the details of how the project is laid out, but what really impressed me at first glance was the terms and conditions, the way you are having mentors sign terms and conditions at the time of minting the project and making sure that people really understand what it is they are investing in, and not even investing, participating in,
Right.
because that's really what you have laid out very clearly, is that this is participation, and it's not we're making money here. This is truly a co-creation, a community movement. And can you give us a little bit of background
Sure.
on the project and what brought you to the Web3 space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'd been looking at NFTs for a while. I was actually introduced into sort of what it was all about when I was writing Bitcoin Billionaires, which was the story of the Winklevoss twins and their rise in the Bitcoin community. And I had met the Winklevi when I wrote the book that was The Social Network. They had been, 2 of my main sources, even though they were kind of the bad guys in that story. And when I wrote Bitcoin Billionaires, I spent a lot of time with them, and they were talking to me about NFTs and about how they really saw this as something that was going to be very important. And I knew it was something really cool, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. Did I want to write a book about it? Did I want to try and write a movie? I really saw it as something that's going to be revolutionary over the next couple of years. That's really going to be something that everyone is going to be involved with. It's going to hit the mainstream in a big way as we move into the metaverse, or as different companies and Hollywood tries to figure out how to sort of navigate this new world of everyone being able to participate. And so, in talking to a couple really smart people in the business, came up with a game plan that the goal wasn't just to drop an NFT and make some money and walk away. The goal was really, how do I use NFTs to build a community around the sort of things that I write, that people like or interested in. That is a way for people to participate, to be a part of it, and we're building towards some sort of project. So that was the initial idea, and the idea was, what we're going to do was we're going to drop 3 lines of NFTs. The first one, was of these rocket memes that were kind of based on the work I did for the Antisocial Network, that are all about GameStop and memes. The second drop is a free drop that's actually, it's more like you have to pay gas, but that's it, for people who own the first drop. And that one is on Bitcoin and billionaires. We're calling them Bitcoin Billies. And then the third drop will be about Vegas. You own all 3, and you get to share in a movie that I'm writing about the NFT space. So I'm going to write a screenplay, and I'm going to split it down the middle with the NFT holders. And so that was the basic idea. And you're right. When the initial mint happened, we had a really interesting opt-in situation, which we didn't really know when we launched it. Were people going to shy away from this? Was this going to be too much?
Yeah.
But the idea
it's really
was,
first of its kind. I've not seen that anywhere else.
We want to be authentic. We want to be real. We don't want to be, there's a million scams in this business, and there's a million people just trying to make money off a community. And we wanted people to understand that this is something different, that we're attempting to build this long-term project that's going to become a platform for other creators and writers to do the same thing. And the BeNFT is really a proof of concept in a way, but it's also the starting place, I think, for a lot of other projects we're going to build on top of it. So that initial rocket that people bought is going to be your entrance into all sorts of things that we can talk about a little bit later. But yeah, that was the basic idea behind it, and we put a lot of thought and a lot of time into planning it way before we launched. I think we worked on it for 6 months to come up with the correct way to do this. How we wanted to price it, how we wanted to get the most involvement, and really allow people to be a part of it. And so that's what it's worked out phenomenally well, and I'm having a blast with it.
You guys are doing a fantastic job, and I'll add in you mentioned 3 drops, and I thought it was really interesting the way you're positioning the 3 drops. You did the Genesis drop, 6,000 pieces, and then, as you said, the second drop is a claim, but it's not a claim per piece. It is a claim per wallet, which is a very interesting line, because it makes the scarcity such a different piece of that puzzle. Of it will be, if somebody minted 10, 20 rockets from the initial collection, they only get to claim their 1 Bitcoin Billy drop. And because it's 1 per wallet, you stated very clearly that that's the case. And I'm interested to know what you guys decided there to maybe limit the group of participants.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, we wanted to add a little bit of fun and game mechanics into it, because the idea is there's going to be, a scarce resource here in the middle of all this. If you want to have the set and take part in the screenplay, you're going to have all 3. So, right now, I think, we had a pretty interesting thing that about 3,600 people bought the 6,000 pieces or something like that, which was really cool.
Yeah, you're at 60%. Yeah, you're 60%.
Which is an awesome number, yes, obviously. And it's really great. But really, we wanted it to be a community that we'll see something in the end. The movie gets made, and everyone gets to partake in it, and everyone gets to be a part of it, which is great. But we also wanted the value to be in people who were in initially, and that bottleneck will be interesting to see how it plays out. If there's demand for it, I could see this next piece being something that's really valuable and really cool. Which is what we wanted, and we put a lot of work into the artwork. You can see my little PFP is one of them. There's little Bitcoin guys that I think is going to be very popular on its own.
Nice! We get a sneak peek. We got the sneak peek, Kingpin.
This is a awesome,
little
guy.
Yes.
And what we're doing, it's I know there's Bitcoin maximalists who aren't into NFTs, and NFT people who aren't into Bitcoin, and we're trying to bridge the gap a little bit by doing an ode to Bitcoin and billionaires, which was my book on that. But on the Ethereum chain. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this takes off. But yes, they're scarce. I mean, there's not going to be 6,000 of them. There's going to be a few thousand of them, depending on how many people claim. And yet there could be 6,000 rockets out there wanting to find a pair. So the game mechanics could get interesting. But we'll see. We definitely wanted, we weren't out to sell millions and millions of these. We were out to sell a certain number. And so everyone, and what's really been great on the Discord we've been doing is that people are pitching ideas for the movie. It's really been a collaborative project. So as I'm working on the screenplay, I'm reading stories from people. And we've also been doing fun things like showing movies. We showed The Social Network, and then I live commented while we watched it on the Discord and things like that.
Fun.
So the community of a few thousand people, I guess 7,000 people, gets to really interact and be a part of this as we move towards the movie. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I mentioned earlier how thought out and how fleshed out you guys really made all of your details and terms and conditions, and that's something that really stood out to me as somebody with your career and comparing the BeNFT to other projects. It really seems like there's a huge gap of like information that's being shared from like I know what's going to happen and I know how this industry works, as opposed to like movie on the roadmap.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty interesting. Can you give us a little background on like, was that a big hurdle to get this project off the ground? And was there a lot of legal that went into the way you're structuring this to make sure that
absolutely.
this is a clear path forward?
Yeah, I mean, our very first conversations were with legal teams. We wanted to make sure that this was done correctly. A screenplay is a work of art, and so the idea is you're participating in a work of art. The goal is to sell the screenplay to a major studio or to develop the movie ourselves. Those are kind of the two pathways that you can travel with a screenplay. And so we wanted people to be really aware of what they were getting into, and what we were trying to do. And we knew because it was unique and because NFTs are the Wild West still. There's not a lot of regulation. There's not a lot of understanding how, government and banks are going to get involved in this as we move forward. We wanted to make sure all of our apples were in a row before we started. So we did spend a lot of time and a lot of money getting the legal framework correct that we could do this. But now it's, running on its own, which is really cool. So everyone who opted in, gets what they're getting into, and we're building this together. And hopefully it's just going to be really, really cool. And hopefully it's going to be a model for Hollywood. And also for other authors, because I do think this is a great way for authors to have a community that is incentivized to help you succeed, but also gets to take part in it.
Mm-hmm.
You get to communicate with them, you get to talk to them, and you get to build a project that they then are going to be the consumers for also. So it's really neat, and I really see this working in a big way, much bigger than what we're doing. I think we're small, and hopefully we'll grow and grow and grow, and that's the idea. And we also wanted it to be grassroots from the beginning. I didn't go out there advertising. I didn't go out there doing any of that stuff. It was really, one of those things
where very organic. I agree.
Organic from the start, and continues to be organic. And as I publicize my books and go out on book tours, obviously it's getting more and more press and mention and stuff like that. And the Anti-Social Network, we're going to shoot that movie this summer. So that movie is presumably going to come out, in a year or so. And that's what the rockets are kind of based on. So the press will come, as we move forward. But we wanted this to have people who really wanted to be a part of it in the beginning, and that's why we priced it low initially. That's why we've sort of kept to this game plan. But yeah, you're right. There was a lot of time spent making sure it was done correctly. And when I wrote the Bitcoin Billionaires book, I understood this. Hanging out with the Winklevi, Bitcoin was similar. It was this Wild West that nobody knew what was real and what wasn't, and you could stumble very easily.
Right.
And that's what's happening in the NFT world right now. You have to be very aware of the projects, and who's behind them, and that's why we wanted to be out there, in a way that you knew who we were. I mean, we were self-doxing this project.
Right, yeah.
Everyone knows who I am. They know I'm on the Discord every day, responding and commenting and stuff like that. And that's the way I want to run this all the way through. Yeah.
Awesome to see. From that quote that you have on your website, I was kind of shocked to see that quote. Kind of not shocked, but like it kind of feels like you've been anticipating the NFT space or the Web3 space before it appeared, and maybe that came from your conversations with the Winklevi. Maybe it stemmed from something earlier. Is this something you really were looking forward to for years as a creator? I would like to be more inclusive. And how?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, being a writer is a lonely profession. You sit in a room or a basement somewhere and you write 6 months out of the year, and then the book comes out and you go on a book tour. But it's all like Twitter is like a megaphone. You're talking to people, you don't know who they are. It's not really interactive in the same way. And I've always kind of wanted the kind of thing where you could create some really cool book club with people who were there for the right reasons, who were there kind of pushing you forward and you're pushing them forward. And it's kind of this thing. So yeah, I've always had my eyes on that. And so when I wrote the book that was The Social Network, that was the introduction into sort of what social media is. And that was, you have to remember, with that book I wrote before Facebook was the monster it was. I mean, we were in the MySpace days back then. And still I already saw that was the future, that what Zuckerberg was doing, was going to change all of our lives dramatically. And then there's a natural progression from that to Bitcoin and crypto, which I think was showing us that value and the things that we consider valuable really comes from the community, not from anything else. The community decides that something's worth something, and as long as it's scarce, it does become worth something. And then we get to the GameStop story, which kind of galvanized that to the next level, where a million people decide that GME is worth something because we love it, and that's bigger than a Wall Street bank. And then we get to so I do really feel like it's a natural progression from the books that I've written to get to this point. But yeah, I've always kind of looked, I've looked at Substack and I've thought, well, that's interesting. People are just sort of basically donating so that you can write. And that's not really what I'm looking for, right? And then I looked at the other models that are out there. I think Brandon Sanderson's doing something very interesting with Kickstarter.
That should be obvious,
right?
With 10 million copies sold and everything. I don't think anybody should be assuming that you're looking to, find a reason to write.
Was, how do you build a community that you get to interact with? And NFTs are just cool and fun. I think that's the other part of it. Is this? I love it. I think you look at the Bored Apes, you look at all these other projects that have exploded, and it's just something very, very fun. And there's a real great community aspect to it built in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it did progress from just wanting to have this sort of community all along. And this is becoming a big part of my life. I mean, this is not something I see as a side project anymore.
Right.
I really see this as central to my career going forward. In every project I do, this is where I'm going to go first. And we'll see what happens for sure.
It really does seem like you have progressed to reach this point, and that's a question that our head of product, Kevin Fabor Zutella, here is in the. He's added as a speaker.
Hello. Yeah.
Hey, Kev. Happy birthday, King.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you, Ben.
Good to meet you as well.
Yeah, Kev's a big fan. He's been reading your stuff for years, and he contributed several questions. One of which was the very insightful piece that you have founded and created your own genre, and it's very interesting that the genre you have created is kind of based on the community, the zeitgeist, if you will, but it's more community based. It's more people that are involved in a thing and paying attention to a space when nobody else really was. And as that's evolved, it's kind of, you're saying now this has been the next step of like, now you are creating that community, and that's what you're going to be writing about next. At two questions here. What is it like to found your own genre and be a leader in that genre, and then see other people around that are following in your footsteps? And then two, how are you just chasing what feels good to you and what stories excite you, or are you chasing where the community energy is as opposed to your personal energy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So it's really interesting. When I started out writing this sort of nonfiction that I do, this sort of genre of nonfiction didn't actually exist. So it was kind of interesting. I know that you guys are all a lot younger than me, but back then, nonfiction on the whole was pretty boring, and I had no interest in writing true stories. I was a fiction writer. I wanted to write thrillers. I wrote for the X-Files television show. I was trying to write thrillers, but they weren't kind of exploding or anything. And then I ran into this group of college kids, these MIT kids, and they were going to Vegas every weekend. So I joined them. I started going to Vegas every weekend. I was watching them do what they were doing, and that became the book Bringing Down the House,
awesome.
which was a huge book and became the movie 21. And so I fell into writing nonfiction, but I wrote it like a movie. My plan was to write it as much like a thriller as I could. And when it came out, it was controversial. I mean, there were a lot of reviewers who were like, "What are you doing? This isn't nonfiction." The New York Times, famously has attacked me enormously in every book that I've written, and they write wonderful reviews that are just sort of, making fun of the style that I use because they didn't quite get it. But then a lot of people started to do the same thing, and you'll see a lot of nonfiction writers writing in a thriller-esque sort of Hollywood style now, which I think is great. So it is interesting when you kind of, I did set out to sort of, write a story like a movie that happened to be true. And then it became a genre around it. And then that's what every book of mine became after that, which was really cool to watch. And it wasn't until, now and NFTs that I decided to step in, come off the sidelines a little bit and be a part of it. Because yes, to your second question, I'm always looking for origin stories. I'm always looking for some big story.
You're looking for what's next. That's a seed planted.
About
that's
what's changing all of our lives, right? And you can go back to Vegas. I wrote about Vegas because I really thought Vegas was about to explode, and it did. But then you go from there to social media, social networks with Facebook and Bitcoin and crypto, and now NFTs. I do think each time, DraftKings was a potential book for me. I didn't end up doing that. But yeah, there's all these movements that you kind of notice and you see and you realize that are something that's going to be a part of all of our lives going forward. And that's what I really want to write about. And yes, you're right. Also, I like to sort of look up for communities that are doing something that not everyone notices, like you walk by this door every day and you don't know what's going on behind it. And that's what the NFT community is. It's like, there's all these people doing this really cool things, and there's all this money being generated and businesses being generated, and the mainstream doesn't get it yet, and doesn't see it yet. And that's where I want to be. I want to be writing about that and being a part of that.
I think you're doing an incredible job of that, King Mezrich.
I have one question that kind of dovetails from that, and just curious, like a lot. There's obviously another cool project in the space, Jenkins, the ballet. Right. We own one of those. We're big fans. How, on the kind of ideation and where you're finding inspiration, some of these things, do you see an opportunity to engage and have the community be more of a part of that, like actually directing the stories, or engage? How far does the community get engaged? Is it is it a royalty play, or is it the creative side of things, or are you starting to get comfortable with that?
Yeah, great question. So what Jenkins is doing is very cool. I've spoken to Neil Strauss. We did a little a talk with them, and I think what they're doing is really, really neat. And you're right. How far do you want to go with this? You can go pretty far with this. Where we started was the idea that they're sharing in the screenplay that I end up writing. But they are sort of the community is involved in as we develop it, as the story develops, they're definitely involved in that respect. But we're talking about where this platform goes next. And we've got a couple of interesting ideas that we're starting to talk about and that we're going to start announcing next week. But the platform is going to be a place both for established authors, and I'm going to find some other ones to join in to do similar to what I'm doing, which is launching NFTs around a work, and getting the community to be able to be involved in the work. But we're also going to find a way to get new voices to be curated by the community, essentially. So what's really interesting about NFTs is, if unlike, say, Amazon Kindle, where you throw a book out there and see what happens, here you could actually decide which books are going to work and which aren't by people, launching an NFT around it. And the community can sort of drive what books rise to the top. So we're thinking of this platform becoming a much bigger place where writers who maybe didn't have the chance to break in through traditional publishing are going to have a way to publish books this way. So yeah, I do think we're going to move in that direction. And we're just sort of planning out how that looks right now. But the technology is amazing. I mean, you could really incorporate, the community into the writing process and into the publishing process. And so I do think that there's a lot of opportunity there to do that. So yeah, I'm huge. Not yet, writing books with NFTs as characters, which I think, is a potential way to go. But what I'm trying to bridge the gap between the real world and the NFT world, I love still keeping traditional publishing involved, because I like to walk into a bookstore and see the books on the shelves. And I think there's always going to be an importance to that part of the project. But I want to find a way for the NFT community to be a part of that also. So that's what we're doing right now. Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah, no, that's big. And I feel like I heard the same thing even at NFT LA in the music side of things, that a lot of these traditional models have evolved over decades or centuries, and they've settled to where we are today. So it's not like you can just completely throw all of that away.
Right. Right.
It's like, there's a business there. And so how do you kind of bring the traditional into this new world? And And there's a lot of resources in that side of the business. So
yeah, I mean, that's
we
a
want
great.
that in.
It's a great analogy. I don't think people want to see vinyl go away entirely, right? And you don't want to feel like the record store experience ever goes away. But you want to find a way to use the new technology and to actually get the musicians paid, right? Rather than the. And so that's what the NFT and Web3 allows. Is it's gonna. I mean, in music, it's gonna. I think totally upend the streaming business and upend that. But bring us back to a place where the community gets to take part of it and the artist gets to be, running their own show, which I think is interesting. So,
remove some of those people from the middle. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, that's what crypto is all about. That's what 3.0's about. That's the way to go. In publishing, the middle was never really that necessary. I mean, I love publishers and I love my publishers, but really what they do is curate and then have access to distribution. That's what they do.
And then charge you to count your money and hand it to you.
They do a lot of that. Yes.
Yeah. You answered the first part of a question that Kevin shared. And as you were answering, you said you went to Vegas with the MIT kids?
Yeah.
So was that like part of the research? You were just like, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go.
It's funny, like, everything, all the fun things in my life, I can just call research. But yeah, basically, I was writing thrillers, and I had a few books they weren't any big books or anything like that, but I did have books coming out. But I was really looking for my next story, and there was a bar in Boston called Crossroads, which some of you who live in Boston might know of. It was, right on Matt's Ave. It was a sort of a dive bar that where a lot of MIT kids hang out. And I was introduced to this group of people from this woman who I'd gone to college with who was dating one of them. And she herself was on the MIT blackjack team, but I didn't know it at the time. And I got to know them, and, they had all this money. It was always in cash. It was always $100 bills. And I went over to the main character's house, and in his laundry was $250,000 in like banded stacks of hundreds. And his real name is Jeff Ma. And Jeff was like, telling me the stories of the MIT blackjack team, and basically was like, you got to start coming to Vegas with us. So I started going to Vegas with them, and I would go and watch them in action. I'm not great at math. And so I was more like what's called a guerrilla player, which is they just tell you what to do. They give you signals at the table, and you raise and lower your bet based on the signals. But yeah, they would go every Friday and come back every Sunday. And they had a duffel bag, which would had about $1 million in it, of a mix of cash and chips. And they would fly from Boston to Vegas. And it was just like the movie 21. I mean, minus all the, running around the strip and stuff. But it was, you go out there and they'd go to the bathroom in the airport and hand out the money or the chips underneath the stalls.
Wow.
And then you'd hit different casinos, and one guy would be the big player who would get signaled in by the other players. And it's just a really cool system. If you watch the movie 21, I think it's on Netflix now. I think it's like in the top 10 on Netflix, which is great. A whole new generation getting to see that film. It really, the blackjack part of that is all very real. That's how it worked. I mean, the teams would dress up. They'd wear costumes. They'd have different characters that they'd play. Because even though card counting's not illegal, a casino will throw you out if they catch you doing it. Or worse, back then they used to, throw you in a back room and slap you around. Now they would never do that. But it was intense, and I did it for I would go with them for a while, to the point where I got kicked out of some casinos, even though I'm horrible at it. I got kicked out of Foxwoods once. Is
that because you were successul that day?
It wasn't that I was successful. It was that I was hanging out with the wrong people.
Okay.
If I sat down at a blackjack table today and I bet $25 a hand, nobody would care. But if I started betting, $300 a hand, very soon someone would come out from a back room and be like, oh, Mr. Mezrich, you're not allowed to play here. That's usually what happens. And sometimes they'll chase you out. I ran out of the Wynn Casino in Vegas once. I was with this guy. His name is Semyon Dukac. I wrote a book called Busting Vegas, which actually came out after Bringing Down the House. And this guy's amazing. He has all of these tricks he can do where he can actually, I don't know if you play blackjack, but if you're sitting at a blackjack table and after the hands are over, the dealer is going to shuffle. They roll the deck into a line, and they hand the cut card to one of the players. And Semyon could take the cut card and actually cut to exactly 100 cards from the bottom of the deck. Something he'd practiced to the point. And it turns out that often you can see that when they roll the stack, you can see that the bottom card is like an ace. So you cut to 100 cards from the bottom, and now they take the back of the deck and they move it to the front. And now the 100th card is that ace that you saw. So what he would do is he would control the table to the point where he'd get dealt that ace. And when you get dealt an ace, you have a much higher advantage. You have a very good chance of winning the hand. So he had this system, it's called cutting the aces, where he'd come in with a team and they'd play tables and just cut until they got to the ace, and they'd bet $10,000 on the ace. And so it's an incredible skill. And I'd watched him do it. And I was sitting at a table and we were doing this, and he had been pretty brazen about it because he wanted to show me. And then he's like, we got to go. And I'm like, why? And he goes, look. And I look, and there's like 2 security guards coming out, and they're heading right towards us. And I'm like, oh my God, well, that's us. And we literally run through the casino, and you're terrified. You don't actually know what would happen if they got you. And probably nothing would happen. Who knows? But, you get out of there really fast. So, yeah, I got to see some really cool things in casinos. He had a lot of systems. He can shuffle track. His team was the king of shuffle tracking. So it turns out that in your head, you mark a group of cards. So when you're watching, you play and you watch, and if you see a group of like face cards played at the same time, you can mark in your head where that is and actually watch it through the shuffle. So even though the dealer's shuffling all the cards, that group of cards stays together. And that group gives you a slight advantage. And they calculate in their head how much of an advantage they have. They raise their bets when they see the card that they marked in the last card. It's really awesome. I mean,
did this ruin Vegas for you, or did this increase the fun that you're having in Vegas?
I'll tell you, I'm a gambler. I'm someone who's always loved gambling. I love going to Vegas. When I wrote Bringing Down the House, I actually stayed in a different hotel room every night until I finished the book. So I wrote that book over a period of 8 weeks, just staying in a different hotel suite every night, and got to know Vegas very, very well. And then when we shot the movie 21, we shot much of it in Vegas, living at the Planet Hollywood, which had just opened at the time. So I have spent a lot more time in Vegas than anyone ever should. I love gambling. I think it's great, but you're right. It does kind of ruin blackjack for you because there's just a lot of math behind it if you want to do it correctly.
Yeah.
And you know what the casino's doing to try and beat you. So I play poker now. I don't play blackjack anymore.
Go ahead, V.
So,
our head of branding, Vanessa King.
Yeah. No, I have a question about that scene which I'm like, seeing this movie happen in my head. So like, do you leave all your chips on the table when you run out? Like you up and go, or like?
You don't leave your chips. You scoop your chips. You take your chips and you dump them in your pocket. The tricky part for the blackjack team was actually cashing in their chips because they ended up keeping a lot of their money in chips, and it gets very hard to cash in like $1 million in chips with people not knowing who you are. So you have to cash in very small amounts, which is really tricky. But
money laundering.
They're not really casinos. Yeah, they're not really allowed to take your tips from you. But it has happened. So there have been teams that have gotten caught and they get back roomed. It's called. You don't want to end up in the back room because that's the place where there's no cameras. And there have been teams that have lost their chips. So it happens. But yeah, I've got lots of stories about people.
It's awesome to hear, Ben. This is fire that you're sharing this. Thanks so much.
Yeah, one of my favorite. Can I tell you one of my favorite stories?
Yeah, please.
One of the
going.
characters.
Yes,
this is kind of a different type of story. But one of the characters on the MIT blackjack team, who in the book I call Martinez, in the movie, Aaron Yu played him in the movie, I believe. And anyways, he was notorious in Vegas, but outside of Vegas, it was a double life. Nobody knew that he was a blackjack player, and he had about a bunch of friends back in Boston. And this woman was having her bachelorette party, and she's like, "Oh, I know you go to Vegas a lot. Can you set me up at a casino?" So he set her up and all of her friends with free suites at the MGM Grand, I think it was. Using one of his fake personas. They had no idea he was a professional blackjack player. So they all went out there and they, had a great bachelorette party. But in the middle of the night, security came to all of their rooms and dragged all of their stuff out, took them all and back roomed this bachorette party.
Wow.
And we're like yelling at them, "Who is Martinez?" And they had never heard of someone named Martinez because one of their security guards had figured out who it was. And so they all got kicked out of the MGM Grand, not having card counted at all, just because of their association. But anyways, I love
that's
that
incredible. An awesome story.
Yeah.
You're talking about how like the research of a project is kind of what you just described to us, and it's really interesting to hear how you researched that for 21, and then how do you decide which pieces to include? And this is another great question from Kevin. How do you decide, which characters, which pieces, and how to really form that into a composite story that is compelling and easy for people like us to follow that aren't that good at math?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So when I do a book, what I do is I spend, a couple months doing the research phase where I'm hanging out with the main characters. I'm getting all of the notes, all the legal documents, if there was a lawsuit or something like that, just figuring out the story as much as I can. And then you kind of create an outline in your head. And for me, it has to film like a movie in my head. Like I want, it to be a Hollywood movie afterwards. And I won't write a book unless I sell the movie rights first. So I
Oh,
actually,
interesting.
in almost all of my books, I've sold it as a movie before I've written the book, which I think is different than most writers. Most writers write the book and then try to sell the movie rights. I actually write a 10-page treatment or book proposal. I take that out to Hollywood. I land a movie deal, then I sell the book, and then I write the book. So I'm thinking of the script basically as I decide which stories go into it and which don't. And you create an arc for your characters. So basically, you know who your main character is. You spend a lot of time with them. You know what they want. You know kind of if there's a love aspect to it or if there's an enemy or something like that. And you build a plot line. Even though it's a true story, you find the notes to that plot line. And so it's really interesting. Most true stories can be broken down the same way a screenplay can be broken down into 3 acts. So act 1, you have your main characters and what they're trying to achieve. Something happens towards the end of act 1 that leads you to act 2, which is where a series of obstacles appear in front of them that they have to get through, which leads you to a big event on about page 200 that leads you into act 3. And almost all stories in real life actually follow that. Your own life follows that. And that's sort of how you break down most movies. And so when I'm looking at true stories, I'm trying to find what are these big moments. When I write a book, like for instance, the Winklevi story, I sat down with them and I'm like, just tell me as many stories as you can about how you got into Bitcoin, what happened with you and Charlie Shrem, Roger Ver, all of these characters in Bitcoin. How did you stumble into this? How did you stumble that? And they just tell you stories. And then I take all of those stories, and some people put them on note cards. I don't use note cards. I just use, pages. But I take all of those stories and I line them up in my head and I start trying to figure out where do they fit into this chronology that I want to create. So I do play with the chronology a little bit. And this is one of the things I get attacked for by some journalists, but I want to make the story as dramatic as possible. So everything in the story is true,
Right.
but I find a way to put it together that really has a beginning, middle, and end. And finding the end is always tricky. Like, where do you end a story? With the GameStop story, that was a very tricky one. And there is no end yet, right? The GameStop
It still hasn't
seems
ended.
to
Yeah.
keep continuing.
I still need my Nokia money. They shut it off.
Right. I mean, so you could be writing that story forever. I wanted to find a good end point, which I think for me, I think the end point was that original congressional hearing. It was really a 1-week story to me. The origins of what happened with GameStop was that crazy, initial short squeeze, the initial Melvin Capital story. And obviously the story continues since then, but there's a beginning, middle, and end. You can look at the Facebook story, the social network. Facebook story is still going enormously, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there could be a 2nd act and a 3rd act and a 4th act, but the origin story was that first year, and so that's what I'm always looking for. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love hearing how you kind of take a fictional approach to nonfiction, because we say all the time you're the star of your own movie, right? And and I think the way that we create stories and tell them in our head naturally is creating that the drama in whatever situation has happened. So I can totally see the thread where we as the audience can relate to these stories even more when they're true, the way that we probably relate to entertainment. I mean, probably nonfiction stories are written in that way because we can relate to them, based on how we see our own lives. So
yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. We are all the star of our own movie. And another corollary to that is, nobody thinks of themselves as the bad guy in the story, right? And so when you approach these stories writing about someone like Mark Zuckerberg or writing about Russian oligarchs, and you have to think from their point of view, and that's what makes it really interesting and intriguing. Even the bad guys think they're the star of their own movie. And so when you're putting a true story down on paper, I do try and think of it that way. I try and think of it, how do we identify with this? What parts of the story make sense to us from our own lives? And it's really intriguing. But yeah, I do think all of life is like many multiple little movies that are all interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's what makes it so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that approach actually is kind of an authentic, your approach to kind of writing, a 10-pager and then selling the movie and then selling the book and then writing is really kind of the roadmap. But that's like how all of these NFT projects kind of pitch these roadmaps, is to say, like, here's a short web page that says this is what we're going to do. And then they sell the dream, get a bunch of money in, and then 90% of them don't execute. And so it's really great to hear that, like, you're already doing that in real life, and and can actually understand, like, okay, if I'm saying that I'm going to do this, this is what it's going to take to actually get it there.
And I'll tell you, that's what it made me nervous when I see all these projects launching that, to make a movie or whatever it is. And, and I'm like, I think
we say that all the time.
Right. It's easy to say that, and it's actually fairly easy to raise the money. But then what do you do? What's next? And that's where it actually gets very, very tricky. And so it does make me nervous when these projects start, because I don't know where their roadmaps are going necessarily. And you do see that. And that's why when we approached this, I was like, I've done this many times. I get the steps. Somebody approached me recently about one of my books, and they're like, we want to start a DAO around your book and raise money. And I was like, I like the idea, but I need to know what you're actually going to do to actually make the movie, because there's a lot more to it than just saying everybody invest in this movie. You have to have a roadmap to how it actually ends up getting into a studio, or getting a screenwriter attached, and getting the actors involved, and then getting it, to a distributor. All of that has to be part of that roadmap, I think. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Well, we've seen, how many $100 million movies have we seen that have completely failed? It's like, it almost doesn't matter how much money you have.
Right. I mean,
if you don't understand the process.
Yeah. And that's really intriguing. So it's funny. I mean, it is great. And I think there's so much power in this community to do things like that, but there has to be really authentic people behind each one. You have to be really careful, obviously, as you sift through the different projects that are out there, to understand who's behind them and what their plan is to actually make this happen, for sure.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and I know Cam has a number of other questions too, but I just want to keep pulling on this thread a little bit, is that, like, from the entirety of the project, and then the amount of money that it takes, and the amount of people that it takes to get all of these things done, and then striking the balance of owning everything, creative control, rights, everything, so that you can give out royalties to the people and that are participating in the NFTs, and give them some ownership, and so that it's like untouched by the traditional, somebody comes in and they buy it from you, and now you can't really do anything. Right. Like, where, are you kind of thinking about how you're moving forward in these projects to be, we're going to figure out all the financing and do this ourselves and maintain entire control,
Yeah, great question. So, my model has always really been to work with studios, to work with either large studios or independent films. With the screenplay, what you can do is you sell the screenplay to a major studio. So there's initial revenue from that, and then you get some points on the back end. So if the movie does actually get made and it does really well, there's more to come from that. On the other side, you sell it to an independent production company, or you develop it with an independent production company. There's a lot less money up front, but if it succeeds, there's a lot more money on the other side. And so those are kind of the two ways you can go with the screenplay, which is what the end product of our 3 drops is. I've leaned towards the studio model more in my career, only because they know how to make movies. And if you have a good screenplay and you get a good actor involved and a good director involved, it's a clear pathway to actually getting it made. So I do like that model, and I think that's the most sort of simple one. But at the same time, if there's a community that's really into it and really wants to be a part of it, you want to go more the independent route. And there's more risk to the independent route, but the payoff can be a lot more. So that's kind of the two options. And I think you make that decision based on the screenplay itself. So when you finish the screenplay, you can decide whether it feels like something that's going to go to a major studio or something that's going to be more, going to Sundance and stuff like that. In which case it ends up on a streamer, and that's a cool way to go too. But for the people who are involved in this, I think it's going to be partially where it goes and how much money it makes, and partially the fun of actually making a movie, right? Of having a screenplay about the NFT space that actually gets somewhere that we all get to go to a premiere for. I think that's the goal. I think for more, I think at least for me, and I think for the people I talk to, that's really the fun of it, I think, because it's spread out over a few thousand people. So, it's less, the payoff financially, I think, than the payoff artistically. But, maybe I'm just being optimistic.
Well,
but I think it's going to be
because, and I think it's pretty interesting that you're introducing new reality-based franchises. And Tony just brought up, like in Hollywood, it's so much easier to approve the next Batman or whatever it is because there's the built-in base. But you're really taking the roadmap, like you just said, and it's really interesting to hear that as well, that you're taking what we consider this new model, and you're saying that's not new at all. I've been taking a roadmap to Hollywood for 15 years or whatever, and they're funding, and then I'm able to deliver on said roadmap. You're actually delivering seeds of franchises that we just haven't seen develop yet. Like you said, there is a second chapter to the meta story that is act 2 of and it's really interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as you've planted these seeds that are their own franchises.
I love what you're saying, and that's exactly right. And I've actually talked about this. I really feel like it's like the Marvel universe.
It
and
is
the social network. The social network was like one aspect of it, right? And you can continue that for sequels, but then you could go off with the Winklevoss story. So Bitcoin Billionaires we're going to make, this summer we're supposed to shoot it. And that's like, the Wolverine story, it's like one of the side Marvel stories. And then we're going to do, the NFT story is one of the side stories, but they're all in the same universe. And the anti-social network, the meme stock phenomenon, these are all
It's a pretty cool universe we have here.
Let me ask about that. And with this one, let me almost kind of challenge you too, because I've been reading your stuff, for years, and something that I'm always impressed about that you're able to pull off that I think is overlooked and is very difficult to pull off. It's just about the subject matter. And this also kind of goes to the genre question that Cam and I were working on earlier. It's a question about storytelling. And I really see it that this is an achievement of yours as a storyteller, because if you look at the actual stories that you managed to tell, the people are geeks and nerds, which, that's not like Tom Cruise action movie material by the rules of 2003. And they're also ultra elite. And so they're not automatically likable. And then the stuff, well, what's the stuff? The stuff is finance and software and math and computers. It's extremely arcane. And so then the bubble around that is it's a nexus to power. That these stories, the outcomes are world changing. But as a storyteller, how do you manage to keep it understandable, and how do you manage to keep it engaging?
Right. That's a great question. When I first came up with the idea of doing the Facebook story, the first response I think was my mom. It was like, no one's going to watch a movie about Facebook, right?
Exactly.
Anybody wants to see that. And I get that. Like Zuckerberg is not the most inspiring character. And the Winklevoss twins, you're right. I mean, people were like, well, these guys started on third base, right? It's like these guys are billionaire. They're 6 foot, whatever, 5 Olympic rower billionaires from Connecticut. Like, who's going to identify with them? But that's not how they see themselves, right? They see themselves as underdogs. They were screwed by Zuckerberg, and they're trying to, do something. So you're right. It's tricky because a lot of these stories, and the NFT space is another one where you don't ever want to show people sitting at a computer screen, right? Like, that's not an interesting scene. It's very hard to shoot that scene interesting. And so you have to find ways to sort of make it dramatic and Shakespearean. And that's usually the interaction between the characters, but also, I'm looking at the NFT space as I develop this screenplay. And one of the intriguing things is there's 3 different storylines that I'm intertwining. One of them is like a young person who stumbles into this world, who doesn't really have much to start. Everyone thinks he's crazy. And, he finds his way through and makes a killing. Another character is an artist or a photographer or a musician. I haven't really singled on the person who is someone who hasn't had the advantages in life and has basically been screwed by traditional media and studios and things like that, but finds their calling in the NFT space. And then the third one, it's going to be a rug puller. It's going to be a scammer. It's going to be one of the, things that we're all going to recognize, people who play around in this space, as someone, maybe he doesn't set out to be a scammer, but it goes in that direction. And I think the drama is going to be the intertwining of these stories. You can find, it's not, you're never going to have a scene where someone's sitting and plugging into a computer, right? But around that, it's the excitement of it. I mean, there's money, there's interesting sort of danger, there are all of these elements in it, and there are family elements to it. I mean, I don't know what your personal experiences are, but plenty of people go into this space and everyone around them thinks they're crazy and everyone around them thinks it's ridiculous. And
very much so.
It's those kind of battles, in a new world like this that I think are really interesting to people. And there's always something very compelling about someone beating the system. And we've seen that again and again. People have won here, right? People have won. And that's awesome to watch. And so I think there's a really dramatic way to do that in this space. And listen, the Bitcoin story, I would not have written the Bitcoin story if I didn't have an in that I thought was dramatic, and that was the Winklevoss twins. It was, people have been pitching me Bitcoin for years, and I was like, I don't know if that's exciting. It seems like a lot of math. I'm not into math. But then it's like, you've got these two giant guys on a beach in Ibiza stumbling into this world, and you're like, wait a minute, there's something here. And then their first partner ends up going to jail, right? Charlie Shrem, who's a wonderful guy. I love Charlie. It's just, there's a lot to the story. And I think the same thing goes on here. So yes, every time I dive into one of these nonfiction stories, I'm looking for these Shakespearean themes, these dramas, these battles. You need a bad guy. You need people who are not evil, but they do the wrong thing, over and over again. You have to kind of find those stories, but anything can be dramatic. You just have to find a way to sort of tell it that is dramatic. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and that definitely makes sense. Like something that definitely resonated personally with you when you said, and then everyone around them says this is crazy. That has been my experience over and over and over again. Or now
everybody here.
Yeah, I know everyone's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I'm and that brings me back to the beginning of crypto. Everybody thought that was crazy too. So yeah.
Hey, as we're on the Facebook Gemini, what irony do you see in Gemini now selling Facebook crypto as as the tables have turned and Facebook is fully transitioned to Meta?
I mean, it's spectacular, right? It's kind of just wild. So I was hanging out a lot with the Winklevi when Facebook attempted its first Libra thing, if you remember Libra.
Yeah, I do.
Which was
came in hot with that.
A wonderful disaster, right? Which you knew was going to kind of be a disaster because of who was behind it, I think, anyways. And I commented at the time, and I was very intrigued, and I talked about it in my book. It's the fact that the twins start Gemini and Zuckerberg starts Libra was not a coincidence, right?
Right.
Like there's a real kind of internal hatred between those. They're fueled by their animosity towards each other.
The first three letters of the brightest star in the constellation Libra are ZUC.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
Yeah. So I think there's something going. I think it's really interesting and intriguing, and I think that they're locked in a battle. I think it's going to go on for years and years and years and years.
I think you're right.
Which is really interesting. So I don't know. It's wild. It's ironic, isn't it? It's just
it's fun. It's fun. Hey, Ben, I know we're getting close to our hour here, and I got a couple more questions on the BeNFT that I'd like to get. So you have the second launch, and that's coming soon, correct? The second launch
is on Monday. On Monday, people are going to be able to people who have a wallet who were part of the snapshot. So we did a snapshot on people who had the rocket, and now they're going to be able to mint their Bitcoin Billy, as we call them.
Awesome. And so is there a window for that you have in place?
Oh, I don't actually know the answer to that. I think Drew one of our listeners is Drew there. I don't know if he can. I don't know how he asked to speak.
Oh yeah,
he might know that.
Just invited Drew.
Drew, do you know the answer? Is there a window? He may not be paying attention.
It's all right. I
He
just
has to
if he hops in, no problem.
I know it starts Monday. I don't know when it ends, when you can
Cool.
mint that by.
And there's no restrictions, right? So if somebody comes in and they mint the second NFT and then decide, hey, I'm not staying in the space anymore, or I'm not sticking with this project, and then somebody like me who didn't mint originally, we did mint through Rad, but I could just come in and collect all three at any point.
Yeah. So basically, you collect all three. You do not have to be an original person. So anybody who wants to go buy the original one's now the cheaper ones. So there's script scores. I don't know if you know the whole way the first one worked, but there are rarity features to them. So some of them could give you 3 shares of the screenplay. Some of them give you 1 share of the screenplay.
Nice.
They all give 1 share of the screenplay, but some of them give more. So those are the more expensive ones. So the lower priced ones, you can get into the project on one of those lower priced rockets. So pick up one of our BeNFT rockets, and then you just have to find your way to buying one of the Bitcoin Billies on the secondary market. And then when the third drop happens, then you can have all 3. So yes, anybody can buy it, and there's no restrictions on that. Yeah.
Awesome. Something I thought that was really unique from your terms and conditions again was that you spelled out to people in the terms and conditions that this is a community project, and we will be splitting these expenses moving forward. And that's kind of what the raise is for, and what you're saying, the revenue. Can you give us a little breakdown on maybe high level? I know you've got specific documentation on the revenue split, but just at a high level, can you give us an idea of how that's going to play out, and maybe how you see?
You mean in
working?
terms of when we sell the screenplay, that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, because I mean, you gave us the TLDR of you're walking in with a 10-page idea, and I'd love to even hear more about that. I think everybody would, of kind of what that process is of you're taking your idea that you love already, you're ready to spend time on, but you're not going to spend the time unless you're paid to do so. How is that entire cycle in without going crazy depth on us, but what's that cycle like?
So what's interesting is what this allowed us to do is sort of skip the first part. So I am actually writing the screenplay now. So it's no longer going to be a treatment. So I'm going to write a spec script on the NFT space. So I've got kind of the main characters in mind of who I'm going to be writing it about. And I have a time limit of 6 months from the third drop.
Awesome.
In which I have to have a finished screenplay. But I'll be finished way before that. It doesn't take me anywhere near that time. And I've already had some meetings with producers, some big Hollywood producers, to talk about taking it out to the different studios. But my initial plan is to write the screenplay and basically go to the major studios, also go to the major streamers, and see what sort of offers we get on it. Movies sell for all sorts of numbers. It all depends on how many people are bidding on it, that kind of thing. So if you have a lot of bidders, a project can sell for a lot of money. If you don't have a lot of bidders, you option it, you get less up front, and then if it gets made, you get more on the other side. And then the goal would be to place it at a major studio. So MGM is making the Antisocial Network, so there's someone who would be an interesting place to go. They're the people who did the Social Network as well. The other option is I do have relationships with Amazon and Netflix, who I know would love this project. So that's another way to go, to do it as a streaming project. But I see this as a feature film, not as a TV show. So we're doing it as a feature film, and then you get a certain amount up front for that, which would go directly to the NFT holders in ETH.
That's amazing.
And that's the way it would work. And then if we have a deal with a studio where we're going to get points, then it's going to be when the movie comes out, as a producer on the project, you get a certain amount, and that everything I make on the movie just gets split with the community. So basically the way it's going to work is everything I make on this movie gets split down the middle with the community.
Awesome.
And that's an interesting way to look at it. So it may work out in a great way, and it may not. I'm hopeful that it will. But the community is going to get to read the screenplay before anybody else and decide whether they think it's great or not. So
I want to stay in this vein on the production, but it's so interesting to me how prolific of a writer you are. Are these ideas like pouring out of you of and I don't mean ideas plural. I mean like the idea singular of I need to write this. I'm going to write this. I have to write this. I'm going to get this funded. Or is it I have a table of ideas and whatever one of these gets funded, I will write? Because like you just said, it's going to take you far less than 6 months, and you've written 24 books, sold 10 million copies, and seem to have, a plethora of projects on the table in front of you that you're considering. are you just able to just pour it out? You just sit down and bam, there it is.
Well, I mean, listen, none of it is easy. Okay,
well, you're making it look easy, so thank you.
So I'm a crazy person. So I basically am locked up in a house in Vermont right now. And I lock myself in my room and I write. I'm working on the sequel to my book, Midnight Ride, right now. So Midnight Ride was a book that just came out, which was a thriller that was a Da Vinci Code style thriller, came out a few weeks ago. And I'm writing the sequel to that, and I'm writing this NFT project. And those are the two projects that I'm doing right now. I see a story that I want to write, and I dive in, I write a proposal, I sell it, and then I write it. So it does, it's hard to say. Like, it's not like I'm usually working on 10 different things at once. It's more like something really intrigues me and I'm excited about it. And that's the story I want to tell. And so the NFT space is one of those stories where I was like, I want to write this story. How should I do it? Well, why don't we do it with the community via an NFT? And that was the thinking. But the idea of doing a book or movie around NFTs was already living in me. It was a matter of how do I do it with the community that became this project. But yeah, I'm always sort of finding different stories or different ideas that I want to do, but it needs to have some sort of a Hollywood potential for me to really dive into it. And then I just go. I go crazy. I research it. I dive in. I interview people, and I start writing.
I love that you say I go crazy. Go ahead, V.
Oh, I have a question about that. With the I love the idea of like bringing the community into kind of the process and like letting them read the script kind of beforehand and everything. My question for that is, as you're talking to these streaming platforms or big studios or producers, do they have any concern about like putting the script out there prior to the movie being filmed?
They would have enormous concern about that. So I have to be more careful than, it's not like I'm going to write the script and just let it float.
Put it on Discord.
That would be a very bad idea. So I've been thinking in my head of how to do this. And I was thinking some fun things might be a live Zoom call with, I'm seeing the community as really producers on this project, right? So it would be really fun as I get into the project, maybe, talking through strokes of it and stuff like that. So I mean, when I say show the screenplay, you're absolutely right. For instance, for the Antisocial Network, which we're going to shoot this summer, I haven't actually even seen the screenplay. So I wrote the book. The studio MGM bought it. They hired these two wonderful screenwriters, these two women who wrote Orange is the New Black, who are just geniuses. And supposedly it's one of the best scripts in Hollywood. And they've already hired a major director who we haven't announced yet. But I actually haven't even seen the screenplay because they're so tight-lipped about the screenplay that I actually asked not to see it, because what happens is they show it to some people, and if it leaks out, those people get blamed. And because I haven't actually seen it, they can't blame me if it leaks out. So you're right. Hollywood is very tight-lipped about screenplays, and it's a really big deal if a screenplay leaks out. So I wouldn't just send a screenplay around. It would be the kind of thing where I might read some of it to a group of people, or something like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Are all the holders? Are you going to put like producer on the credits?
I don't know if we can
do
that, but we will do a premiere party for all the holders. That would be one really cool thing. We're actually talking about doing a big party for holders this summer of the Genesis rocket. Anyways, Big Night Productions. I don't know if any of you are from Boston. Ed Kane, who owns all of the clubs and restaurants in Boston, owns Empire, and he's a collector of and he wants to throw us a party. So we might be doing a big party this summer for holders. Our goal is that our NFT is going to be entrance to a whole lot of things. This project with the movie is just one facet of it, but your Genesis rocket is going to give you entrance into a whole bunch of things. Some of which we're going to start announcing next week, but parties, premieres, things like that. We actually invited 25 of our holders to my book party for Midnight Ride, and they came to Boston, and it was just amazing.
Wow.
So we're going to be doing lots of live things like that. I want to do a Vegas night where we actually do a poker night in Vegas, where anybody who has a rocket is going to be invited, and we'll do like a big Vegas party when COVID slows down. Poker games, things like that. We're going to have a lot of added value to these things for sure.
Ben, I've got a couple questions, and then we'll let you go. If you're not pressed for time right now, if you got a few more minutes with us.
I got a couple minutes.
Cool. I don't want to steal your time. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what has the feedback and response been from the traditional media and traditional Hollywood space that you've seen? What's the feedback you've got from your project, and what do you see in there?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of calls from Hollywood, and I'm actually being asked to consult on lots and lots of projects. So Hollywood really is trying to figure out how to get into the NFT game in a big way. And they're doing it poorly sometimes, and sometimes they're figuring out better ways to do it. So I have been meeting and talking to a lot of people at agencies, at studios, and I'm involved in a couple of projects that are attempting to get launched in Hollywood to figure out ways to sort of NFTize movies and things like that. Everyone wants to figure out a way to do it, but to do it authentically and right is going to take a lot of smart thinking. So, hopefully there'll be some good projects coming out of that. In terms of mainstream media, I know I went on CNBC and talked a bit about this. The Russian oligarch, because of the war in Ukraine, we kind of got sideswiped by the bigger news story. And because I wrote a book about Russian oligarchs, I've been doing a lot of interviews about that and not as many about NFTs. But overall, mainstream media has been very positive about what we're doing, and just sort of, I know that Andrew Ross Sorkin has been watching what we've been doing. A lot of different journalists have been watching, and I'll be doing more and more over the summer of mainstream media about it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I know you have the Ukraine and Russia. You wrote the books on Russia, and you're such an expert there. I just felt like highlighting yourself and your career and the Mezrich NFT today was
I
the
love
way
that.
to go.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
So one question we've been asking all of our guests lately is maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing a couple mistakes and maybe some lessons that you've learned so far on your BeNFT journey, and any advice for people looking to follow in your footsteps. I know it's a big question, so let's break it down to maybe let's start with your journey.
The journey or the mistakes first? Which do you want?
Well, the journey, the Mezrich NFT, and maybe the lessons learned and mistakes there, and then after that.
Yeah. So I mean, the Mezrich NFT, it's been such a blast and it's been incredible. I came into it with very little knowledge about how this world worked as really a new person. And what's been really cool about the BeNFT is a lot of our initial rocket holders are people who've never owned a NFT before. We brought in almost half of the people who bought into us are people brand new to this space. And that's because some of them are fans of mine, and it's something we set out to do. So my moderators, who are wonderful, spent a lot of time talking through people getting their first wallet, getting their ETH first and all of that. I do think that there were a lot of scammers, obviously, who saw that and came to Discord, and people opened DMs and got caught in things. So if I were going to pick one, I would love to have from the very beginning been warning people more about DMs and stuff on Discord, and just understanding Discord more.
That's not your responsibility, though.
Absolutely, I get it. But as someone who was also new to it, I didn't even know like that existed when I first started.
I think we're all learning new attack vectors every day. So it's to be responsible for all of them for everybody's a tough pill to swallow.
Absolutely.
There was a $600 million hack a couple days ago.
I felt bad every time I heard I felt bad every time I heard a story about someone who would come on Twitter and be like, "Oh, I'm so excited about your private sale tonight." And I'd be like, no, there's no private sale tonight. That was a little nerve-wracking. So I think, I've been very fortunate. The people who I work with are just incredible. Drew Gia, who's on here, I think, Bunchu, who's just a genius, who knows more about this than I'll ever know, and Adam Brotman, who's the person who brought me into it. We have a really amazing group of people who I've been very fortunate to work with, because I was a newbie to this whole thing, and I know a lot of the people who bought in were people who were brand new to the space, and I love that we're introducing people to NFTs. I think that's one of the compelling things about our project, is that it's going to be people who've never heard of this before, right? And that's part of the coolness. So I would say it's been an incredible journey. And so advice to people, I think number one is be authentic. I think this community really, really sees through the inauthentic things pretty quickly. And I love the idea of people being honest and open. And I think the projects that I would gravitate towards are the ones I know who's behind it. Yeah. And I know why they're doing it. And they're not just trying to sell an NFT to me. But there's some real authentic reason that they're there, and their community has a real purpose. So I've looked at, some of the communities that I really love are the ones that seem to have, a purpose that I get and that are very open about.
Can you name a couple of those, maybe a couple that you like?
I think On-Chain Monkeys is really cool. What they do. I love timepieces and Time Magazine. I've gotten to know Keith Grossman very well over there, and I think they really have a great vision of how an old world legacy magazine like Time Magazine moves into this space in an interesting way. They're not trying to make money off their audience. They're really trying to change things and do cool things. So I love those projects. I love Jenkins. I think that's a great project and amazing what they're doing. I've enjoyed the Goats people have been cool. And I don't know, we've partnered with a few people which have been awesome along the way, but those are the ones that stick out right now. But I'm sure I'm missing a lot more that are phenomenal. But I just like groups of people that they're so enthusiastic and so into it, and you know who they are. And I don't like the idea of a celebrity coming on to sell an NFT. I think that that's a mistake for them too. If they're not willing to be a part of the community. And
I think it was a mistake for them buying the NFTs and just showing that they bought one or two and not really participating. I think that was a mistake.
Right. There's no point to that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not about the status of it. It's about the community behind it and being part of the community. If you're not willing to go there, if you're not interested in that, like I love it. I'm on the Discord all the time because I want to be. And when I'm looking at other authors who I want to bring into this space, I'm going to be very wary of, what is their reason for doing this, right? Does Stephen King just want to sell his next book, or does Stephen King want to be a part of a Stephen King community through an NFT? That's very different, right? So I do think that that's important for people to keep an eye on.
Chia, you have a question, your hand up. Thank you for waiting and being patient. Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't want to interrupt this beautiful conversation. I just wanted to help out regarding the information about the minting window.
Thank you.
So from what I know, it's around 60 days. So the window will be pretty long. So holders of, the drop 1 will be able to mint drop 2 for, almost until we get to drop 3. So it will be around 60 days. So a long time.
Great.
Thank you, Gia.
That's good.
Gia is one of our wonderful moderators who's been incredible.
Thank you.
Glad. Thank you so much for that info. I'm not really the technical guy. I'm just the strange Bitcoin face.
I love your NFT, Ben. I love the profile pic you have right now. I'm pumped for those to launch. When is the date on that? That's Monday?
Monday.
Okay.
So they'll be up. I'm sure there'll be some on OpenSea. I do think that there's going to be limited supply because people are going to want to hold them to have all 3. But I'm sure people who have bought the other one are going to be able to find them on secondary. And we'll have the links. I'll have them on my link tree and we'll have them on our Discord as well.
We'll have them everywhere for everybody too. Ben Mezrich, NFT.com. Anybody wanting to check that out? Go ahead, Tony.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, we'll be claiming ours for sure.
Awesome. So fun.
Does anybody else have any questions for King Ben Mezrich while we're here? Thank you all for tuning in today. It's been a great conversation. Ben,
thank you, man. It's been awesome.
It has been awesome. We really appreciate your time very much, and we appreciate your contributions to the space. It's really great to see somebody coming in and taking the forethought to, just the terms and conditions really floored me of like, wow, this is something that is thought out. They actually know what they're doing. They see the 10 steps that have to be done, and they're telling me ahead of time what these steps are and what we have to, for X to be true, what else has to also be true. And this is the map to get there. And I feel like as I was doing the research on your project, I was sold on what you're doing more so than any other project that I've seen in the space. They're like, we're going to start a movie. We're going to make a movie. We're going to make an animated series. And being in media and being a creator myself, I'm like, well, good luck, fam. I'll see you. Let me know when it's done. Send me a link when it's done. But you guys putting as much thought and time and money and effort into that entire process of laying that foundation, really, it feels good. It's good to see, and it seems like that's the way the space is going. So thank you very much for bringing that energy into our space. It's great to see, and it's great to be a part of.
I appreciate it, and thanks for having me here. This was really, really fun, and best of luck to everyone, and we'll see you all out there.
Thank you, Kid Ben. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Bye, guys.
Everybody, that's been episode 9 of NFTV. It was a great conversation today, and we have really enjoyed every minute with Ben Mezrich. It's been fun to hear his stories and everybody that contributed today. Co-host John Anthony, our head of branding, Vanessa Kincaid, our head of product, Kevin Fayborg, Zutella. Happy birthday, King. Mark Lar,
thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for jumping in. Mark Lar, I got to your question. I hope you were here to hear it. And everybody else that tuned in, thank you very much. and we'll get this out as soon as possible and get some clips going. I hope y'all have a wonderful weekend. Make sure you check out our Discord. Tony will get our community updates here in just a little bit. It was a big week for us.
Working on them now.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Big week for us and lots of stuff coming, you guys. We're very excited about a lot of developments, and we have updates every week. Make sure you check out our Discord. The our Discord link is in our bio. Make sure you check out everything Ben Mezrich NFT. You can visit benmezrichnft.com. Check out rad.live, and we'll see y'all out there. Thanks for stopping in.
Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend, everybody. See you next time.